Welcome to From Betrayal to Breakthrough. I'm Dr. Debi Silber, and today's guest is Dr. Gary Lawrence. Dr. Gary is the founder and director of New Life Dynamics Christian Counseling Ministries and author of his best-selling book, Rejection Junkies. After 20 years as the host of his own radio show, Life Mastery Counseling with Dr. G, Dr. G has personally met with and coached more than 6,000 clients and has inspired thousands more on radio, television, and stage. Dr. G specializes on breaking down the damaging effects of rejection and the way in which this trauma manifests throughout all phases of life. In Rejection Junkies, Dr. G helps readers to recognize the circumstances that hold them hostage, keeping them stuck and making them bitter. So welcome to today's episode where we're diving deeply into the impact of rejection and emotional wounds with Dr. G. Have you ever wondered why certain relationship patterns keep repeating or why past hurts seem to linger? Dr. G unpacks how rejection is formed early in life and how it shapes our relationships, self-worth, and ability to heal from betrayal. If you're ready to break free from negative emotional cycles and step into healing, you're going to love this conversation. Let's get started. Okay, everybody, I am with Dr. G today, Gary, and we are going to be talking all about rejection. Welcome, Gary.
Oh, good morning. It's great to be here with you, Debbie. It's great to finally get to meet you.
Yes, you too. You as well. So right before I hit record, you were saying how what you teach and what I teach, the 5 stages from betrayal to breakthrough, really work seamlessly together. And I want to share that with the audience. But before we do that, I want to know where you're coming from and why you did all this research and work that you've done. And tell us a story where you got started with all this.
Oh, my goodness. That could take us all day, but I know we only have about half an hour. But anyway, rejection begins from birth, okay? And all the truths that you teach about betrayal and recovery and how people get stuck in the third phase, it just fits right in like a glove on a hand with everything I teach. Let me start out with this truth. And this is true of all of us. By age 8, 80% of our emotional patterns are formed. Okay. By age 18, 100% of our self-image is formed. Okay. So we all go through our 20s and our 30s and our 40s. Well, we may get a better education. We learn how to make money. We get gray hair and wrinkles. Okay. But the older we get, the less opportunity we have to mature emotionally. So let me go back to the first truth. By age 8, 80% of our emotional patterns are formed. If you have an emotional pattern of anxiety, I'll guarantee you it was formed in the relationship your parents had with each other. If you have an emotional pattern of anger, I'll guarantee you it came in the early years of your life by those who were in charge of your well-being. Let me tell you this funny story. I remember.
And you know what, Gary, I so want you to do that. But what comes up for me when you say that is, like, I have 4 kids and they are so different from one another.
Sure.
So and I'd love to hear your story, but can you explain to me how the same parents, because I have a feeling a lot of our listeners are thinking about this. How could it be that the same parents could have 4 children that couldn't be more different than one another, and all their patterns are formed if they feel they were doing things the same way?
Well, there's basically 4 personalities, 4 different personalities. There's the sanguine personality. The key word for the sanguine is popularity. I want everybody to like me. I just want to have fun. Sanguine personalities have a tendency or a habit of making commitments, and they have a hard time following through. Sanguines don't like to create conflict. Sanguines want to get along with everybody. Sanguines stand for many things, but not normally one thing, okay? So that's the sanguine personality. Then you have the choleric personality, of which I think that you are somewhat choleric, just from what I've heard you, because cholerics, their key word is power. I will be in control. I will say what needs to be said. Cholerics don't live in fear. Cholerics live in fact. Okay. This is the reality of where I am today. And this is the reality of where you are today. I love that. Okay. And then you've got the melancholy. The melancholy, their key word is perfection. every a place for everything and everything in its place. If it's worth being done, it's worth doing right. So perfection is their key word. And then you've got the phlegmatic. Now, the phlegmatic, their key word is peace. Please, I don't want conflict. I don't want pressure. I'll do whatever it takes to have a peaceful relationship with you. And as I was listening to you train, I thought, well, it's usually the phlegmatic personality that stays in that third level. Okay. They stare there and excuse me, they recycle and recycle the past and
Hmm.
they keep recycling it.
Is it possible to have a combination of those?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a choleric melancholy. I'm
Uh-huh.
about 50-50. Okay. My wife is a phlegmatic sanguine.
Hmm.
And I'll get to that story later. But I started telling you the story about this couple that came to me for counseling years ago. He was a retired medical doctor. He was 80 years old. And when he heard me say by age 8, 80% of our emotional patterns are formed, he interrupted me. And he said, well, Dr. G, what you're telling me is I'm an 80-year-old, 8-year-old. And I said, yeah, you're right, Doc. And his wife leaned over and patted him on the leg and said, see, sweetheart, I told you act like a little boy. Okay. See, it's often said that age and wisdom come together, but that's not true. Sad to say, age usually comes by itself.
Hmm. That makes so much sense. And because
Right.
I see it with people, the older they get doesn't necessarily mean the wiser they get. Absolutely. It's really it's the experiences we have and then of course what we choose to do with it. That's where
Yeah.
the wisdom comes in.
Yeah. 100% accurate. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. So now here you are, you're 8 years old. You're so much of the way we're responding and reacting has been formed already. Tell us what
Sure.
goes on then until 18.
Well, life experiences goes on. You go into junior high and high school, and
Mhm.
then you go into college maybe, and then the experiences you have in your adult life just compound the negative emotional patterns that you have. And here's what's sad: it's human nature. We, by our nature, have a tendency to focus on the negative, not the positive. And when you focus on the negative, they're reinforced. They become stronger. For an example, Sylvia and I, we met in college. Oh my goodness, back in 1967. That's hard to believe. As a matter of fact, we just celebrated our 58th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations. Happy
Yeah.
anniversary.
Well, thank you. And the good news is we've decided we're going to stay together. Okay. But she was raised in a very strict Christian home. I love what you teach about betrayal and recovery because there's so many levels of betrayal, so many directions it comes from. But she was raised in a strict Christian home. They were in church every time the doors were open.
Mhm.
But her mother was a very angry, narcissistic, physically abusive, emotionally and verbally abusive personality. And at one time, her mother, Sylvia, was 9 years old, and she got a beating from her mother so bad that Sylvia literally could not walk afterwards. The doorbell rang just after the beating was completed. Sylvia crawled and hid in the closet in the master bedroom. The reason she hid, there were some ladies from the church that had come over for Christian fellowship.
Oh, wow.
See, isn't that sad? Two different lives with
Mhm.
that little girl being so horribly abused. But then from ages 7 to 12, Sylvia was suffering from tuberculosis. And she was bedfast for 12 months. She couldn't even get out of bed to use the restroom. Well, that's when her father began to sexually abuse her. And of course, then when we got married, that was the big family secret. I knew nothing of it.
Mhm.
But what happened is 3 months after we were married, I was 22 years old, just a young college fellow, and I wanted to get home to my wife. And I had a speaking engagement that weekend, so I traveled late and didn't get home till midnight that Sunday night. And she was in bed, and I fixed myself something to eat and took a shower and went in and got in bed and began to caress her like a young husband would his wife. And Dr. Debbie, she literally got out of bed so fast she slammed her head against the wall And for the next 4 hours, she sat there with her knees drawn up to her chest, saying, "Please don't touch me like that. My daddy told me never let another man touch me that way, the way he did."
Oh,
And that was my introduction to her sexual abuse.
wow.
Now, we have a term for it today called PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, I thought she was just losing her mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. She was having a nervous breakdown. I didn't understand it. But now I do understand it. When her father sexually abused his daughter, no matter who she married, her husband was going to be sexually abused and sexually rejected.
Yes.
You see, it goes on generation after generation after generation.
So how because I'm always interested in the what that does and then how to move through it. So it clearly it showed itself in her response to you. How did she move through that? What did she do?
That's a great question, and I'll answer that. Let me tell you my side of the story.
Sure.
I was raised in a home environment where both my parents were extreme alcoholics. They were agnostics. God was not part of our life. God was not part of our conversation. A lot of physical abuse. My father believed my mother got pregnant by another man, and that was the result of that union. And so I was always referred to as the bastard. He would say to my mother, "Shorty, get that little bastard out of here." There was no verbal terms of love or acceptance or praise or appreciation. So when we met in college, I saw her as that beautiful brunette with olive skin, brunette hair, and beautiful brown eyes. And I said to my roommate, I said, "Bob, you see that beautiful brunette over there?" He said, "Yeah, what about her?" I said, "I'm going to ask her out for a date." I said, "As a matter of fact, I'll probably end up marrying her."
Oh,
He just laughed. But anyway, 4 months later, we got married. Now, here's what we didn't know. I thought it was love. Actually, it was lust. Okay, I have to be honest. I don't believe in love before marriage. Love is something you build. Love is something that you create. Love is something that you capture and you hold it in your heart and you shape it and you sculpt it.
mm-hmm.
But see, she handled her rejection by withdrawing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there was no verbalization. She never heard the words "I love you."
Yeah.
She did hear from her mother and her grandmother, "You are not a pretty girl. You're an ugly little girl. Don't ever believe if anybody ever tells you you're pretty."
Jeez.
So she was raised in that environment. Well, see, that's covert rejection. It's not obvious.
Yeah.
Okay. And I say it like this: the absence of a good thing is as destructive as the presence of a bad thing. The absence of verbalization, the absence of affirmation, the absence of praise, the absence of physical affection on a healthy level. The absence of those good things are as negative as the presence of the hostility that I was raised in.
I can see that.
See, so, and here's the truth I want to share with your audience. In every marriage, there's a parent and there's a child.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with gender. Okay. It has everything to do with the formative childhood personalities that you were developed in your home life. And you carry that into your marriage. I've often said to Sylvie, "Boy, I wish I could get my mother and father and your mother and father together in the same house and let them fight it out."
Oh
Okay.
boy.
Yeah. Oh boy, you're absolutely right. And as you well know, you will bring into your marriage your family.
Mm-hmm.
You can't help it when you marry a woman or a man, you marry their entire background.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah. So now here you are learning these things about one another, where you came from, where she came from. And it's a now you're sort of confronted with this new aspect of your marriage that you didn't see coming, you didn't plan for, she didn't plan for. How did you
No.
work through that? What'd you do?
Well, we were missionaries to Canada, and we went there in 1971. And I rented an empty Lutheran church building and just started knocking doors in a wealthy neighborhood. I didn't go to the poor neighborhood. I believe the wealthy people need Christ too.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, in 7 months' time, in 6 months' time, we had 170 in our congregation. In 3 years, we bought 5 acres of land and built a 450 seat auditorium.
Oh,
And then we built an educational facility for 125 students. My ministry was being tremendously blessed of God. but my marriage was in shambles.
Mm,
And as I was traveling throughout the United States to raise financial support to go to Canada, I had the ability to make friendships with pastors and their wives, and they felt safe with me. They would come to me for counseling. I didn't ask for it, it's just something that developed. And I began to see patterns just like you have. And you began to name tag those patterns.
mhm,
You begin to identify the origin of those patterns. Okay. For an example, every pastor without fail, every pastor, I would ask them this one question: did your father or mother teach you how to love a wife? Oh, no, 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 not at all. But they're a pastor, they're leading the flock.
mm,
Okay. See, no one ever taught me how to love a wife. Now, my father did teach me how to yell at a wife.
mhm,
He
mhm.
did teach me how to curse a wife. So when I would say things to her like, "You sure are beautiful," she would look at me like I had snakes in my hair.
Wow.
Okay. And then I'd say, "Well, you don't believe me when I tell you that." And she would literally say, "Well, the only reason you say things like that is because you're my husband. And that's what husbands are supposed to say." So then I'd throw my hands up in my immaturity and I'd say, "Fine, I'll never compliment you again." Ah, now we're back to what she's comfortable with.
Right. Right.
See, she was comfortable with that covert rejection of not receiving words of positive verbalization.
Yeah.
That's why my book, Rejection Junkies. When you're a junkie, that means you're addicted to some substance or some habit that is controlling you. And
How else does it show itself?
oh my goodness, many, many ways. For example, fear. Fear becomes an emotional pattern,
Hmm.
a sense of a lack of commitment. You're not able to commit yourself to someone else because you've never experienced a healthy level of commitment in your family.
It
Okay.
almost seems like it's less threatening. We'll reject ourselves so we don't have to deal with the rejection from someone else.
You are right on. I agree with you 100%. So, anyway, what happened is, even though my ministry was being greatly blessed to God, pastors and their wives were coming to me for counseling. They were flying up to Canada. Sylvia decided to leave me. She decided the best thing she could do for me is to leave me because she could never do anything to make me happy.
Hmm.
Well, that's because I was so angry.
Yeah.
But boy, on Sunday mornings, I wasn't angry. I'd say, "Oh, it's so good to see you, Mrs. Brown. I'm glad you're in God's house today." That type of stuff.
Yeah.
And so she decided to leave me. And I thought, you know what? I didn't get married to get divorced. Why are we rejecting each other? Why are we playing that stupid game? I'll reject you before you reject me.
Mhm.
And I said, "Sylvia, if you won't leave me, I promise you, if we believe the Word of God has the answers to every problem, I'm going to get into the scriptures and I'm going to find the answer." And I found the answer, Dr. Debbie. It's in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15. Look very closely, lest any person misses out on the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness trouble you and thereby many be defiled. That root of bitterness does two things: it troubles the individual and it defiles many.
Yeah.
It's what we call the generational pass down.
When you say that, I'm picturing a weed in a garden and what that weed does to
Right,
just take over. It
right,
poisons the whole thing.
right. Until you pull the weed out. Okay. And so, boy, the first 10 to 12 years of our marriage were not happy years.
Mhm.
Okay. And so I'll never forget, we were coming home from El Paso, Texas to Albuquerque, New Mexico. We'd come back to the States in 1980 and started New Life Dynamics Christian Counseling Ministry. And I had decided I'm going to divorce Sylvia. I wasn't mad at her. I wasn't upset. I was just done.
Mhm.
And so I told her on the way home, "Sylvia, I've just made this decision. I'm going to file for a divorce." And she very quietly said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I've just decided I cannot live with an emotionally damaged human being the rest of my life. I will not do that to myself." Of course, that was my pride talking then, right? Because I was so filled with bitterness, it was pathetic. And she said, "But I'm not like you." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You're always mad. You're always yelling."
Yeah.
And I looked at her, I said, Sylvia, you're right. You're not like me. But when your father sexually abused you, he wounded your spirit.
Hmm.
You have a very crippled, wounded spirit. And what you've done is you built this wall of safety around yourself
Yeah.
so that I can't get close to you, so that we can't bond.
Did she
I said,
see that? Did she acknowledge that?
at that time, that's the thing. And I said, I repeated, I said, you have a very, very damaged, wounded spirit.
Hmm.
And I'm telling you what, Dr. Debbie, she just burst out crying, burst out bawling. For the first time,
Hmm.
she realized that she was a very angry, bitter human being in a quiet way.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You know what's so interesting about what you're saying, Dr. G, is that there are so many people at this very moment listening, watching this episode, saying, "That's me," or
Sure.
"That's someone I love." And sometimes it just takes that sort of shock of
Right.
taking a look and being confronted with this to
Right.
open it up to do their work and then of course heal it.
Right. Absolutely. People say, well, did you do a lot of premarital counseling? No, I didn't. Well, why not? Because they haven't suffered enough.
Mm,
Okay. The truth is, people need to get married and reject each other before they realize they got a real problem.
right.
Okay.
Right.
You can't fix the problem until you know it's there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I want to keep going with that, but it's, I'm curious, how was it that, and because you brought this up when Sylvia was young in her house with her parents, and then let's say someone from the church would show up, and then how you would be so angry and then be so friendly, let's say Sunday morning. How do you reconcile with that? Where are those two different sides coming in, and how do you just sort of shelve it, detach, disassociate, whatever it is, so that you could be almost like two different people?
I'm so glad you asked that. Well, first of all, you got to get rid of the root of bitterness. Okay. Now, I don't have the time or the ability to talk to your audience about how to get free of their bitterness. But when people, for an example, you talk a lot about betrayal,
Mhm,
and I know that betrayal is a major part of bitterness.
mhm,
I had a couple come in for counseling, and he was involved in an extramarital affair, but he was denying it. And so his wife, she was very angry, very wounded, and I asked her to step out in the reception area. And when she did, then I said to the husband, excuse me, I said to the husband, I'm just going to ask you one time, and I'm going to ask you, when you answer me, don't look at the ceiling or the floor or the walls. Look at me in the eyes because you're not in trouble with me.
mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
Are you having an extramarital affair? And he looked down at the floor and I said, oh, back to my eyes now. And he said, yeah, I am. And I said, okay. And he said, well, if I talk to you about it, will I have to give it up? And I said, oh, no, no, no. I wouldn't ask you to give up that affair for nothing. And he looked at me, he said, are you a Christian counselor? I said, oh, yes. I said, but you have to understand something. I'm not going to focus on your behavior. Okay. Your behavior is not your problem. Okay. The affair you're having is not your problem. Stop and think of all the lies you've told to have this affair. Stop and think of all the money you've spent to have this affair. I said, I wouldn't take that away from you at all. And here's why. The affair you're having is not your problem. It's just a symptom.
Mhm.
If we identify and isolate and eliminate the problem, the affair will disappear.
And I have to step in here because I know I know these words. It makes a lot of sense coming from your standpoint, but for all the betrayed women and men that are
Right.
listening, they're saying, "What do you mean that's not the problem? That is clearly a problem because they're the recipient of that problem." I totally understand where you're coming from, but just to clarify for the people who are the recipient
Right.
of the affair.
Right. Well, sometimes a person's behavior betrays their character.
Mm-hmm,
What they do is not a good representation of who they are.
mm-hmm,
Okay. And in every marriage, there's rejection on all different levels of life. Okay. And for an example, you show me a mother that's overprotective. She's a helicopter mother. She removes every obstacle for their children. They are creating a level of covert rejection, whether it's a male or female. When that person gets married, they will become the child in that marriage.
mm-hmm.
Okay, it's a setup. When Sylvia and I got married, I became the parent, she became the child. I
Right.
took her mother's place because her mother was a hostile woman.
Yeah.
I was a hostile, angry man. The only differences was the sexes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've gotten to the place of understanding where all this stuff comes from and how it shows itself. Let's get to the part of, okay, now we realize, wow, we really are, these beliefs have been formed, this personality and these characteristics have been formed from where we came from. What do we do about it?
Uh, for me to answer that would be like giving you styling your hair over the internet. I couldn't do it. But I have a system. When people come to me, just like you have a system,
Mhm,
I have basic goals. Number one, I want to identify the underlying problem, not treat the symptom.
mhm,
Hostility, anxiety, depression, fear, anxiety, a sense of betrayal.
mhm.
That's all symptomatic behavior. That's not the problem. After we identify the problem, I'm going to isolate the problem. I take their life history in about a 30,000 foot high elevation of what happened to create their negative patterns. So then, after we identify and isolate, the third goal is we're going to eliminate. I'm going to give them principles and truth to help them break those patterns, get free from their past so they can enjoy the present and create a future without all the rejection.
Yeah.
Does that make
And
sense?
yeah, and let's say someone realizes, oh my gosh, you know what? My past is has really created this way I've been that I see now has been so cruel to my partner.
Right.
What can they do? What can they offer?
They can't offer anything if they're still in bondage to that root of bitterness
Mm,
because bitterness troubles you and defiles many. It literally corrupts every relationship you embrace.
mm,
Okay. And what's funny is I have people say, well, I got divorced after 10 years and I decided I don't have to live with that person anymore. I'm going to find someone that loves me. And I'll look at them and say, well, let me ask you a question. Has anybody ever taught you how to love yourself?
mhm,
Okay. See, a man's ability to love his wife is the overflow of his own self esteem.
mhm.
If he doesn't have a positive level of self esteem and self acceptance, he has nothing to give to his wife. And he will be forever a taker and not a giver.
It hearing this over and over and over again, it fascinates me why we don't teach these basic principles to kids. Why are they not learning this in school?
Well, because most teachers are in total emotional bondage. You can't teach what you don't have.
Yeah.
You see, I know, Dr. Debbie, we don't have time to go through your experiences,
Mhm.
but how did you get to the place where you are today to teach the truth that you know about betrayal and recovery?
Yeah. From the hardest lessons learned.
Right. You had to go through it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And as I was listening to you, I thought, well, I wonder what happened to her. It's not important for me to know what happened to you. It's important for me to know why it happened.
Yeah.
God used that to make you the person you are today. And you learned some truths, how to respond to it on a positive level and remove that betrayal as the enemy and begin to embrace it as the mentor that God wanted you to have in your life.
Yeah. I agree. Dr. G,
Right.
this has been fascinating to me. As we start to wind down, what do you want to make sure everyone knows?
Well, I think it's important to know that everyone can learn how to get free mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially. Okay. You don't have to stay in bondage.
Mhm.
And I encourage your audience to continue to listen to Dr. Debbie because this lady knows what she's talking about. And I've never met her before. Today's the first time I even spoke to her, but she makes sense. And it's so sad that common sense isn't more common, you know.
Yeah. Well, and
But
thank you so much for those kind words. It has been such a pleasure to spend this time with you. Where do we go to learn more about you, the great work you do, and your book?
oh, I'm so glad you asked. You can go to my website, rejectionjunkies.com. That's Rejection Junkies. That's spelled JUNKIES, rejectionjunkies.com. And by the way, on my homepage, in the lower right hand corner, there's a box that says, are you a rejection junkie?
Mhm.
If you fill out that quiz and put your phone number in there, when I get the results, I will call you or send you an email inviting you to an absolutely free 30-minute evaluation of the results of your quiz. And of course, I believe this. I believe that everybody is hooked on some level of rejection patterns.
Mhm.
Okay. And so the bottom line is opposites attract, then they attack, then they retract. They pull away from each other.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. And that's why the divorce rate is so high in America. I think
Yeah.
it's something like 64%.
That's crazy. Well,
Yeah.
Dr. G, you have shed so much light and so much wisdom. Uh, you've shared so much with us today. I'm so grateful and appreciative. I want to thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. What a joy and an honor to meet you, Debbie.
Thank you. What an eye opening conversation with Dr. G. Understanding how rejection and emotional patterns take root is the first step towards true healing. Stay in touch with Dr. G by going to rejectionjunkies.com, and we'll have all of his information in the show notes at thepbtinstitute.com/podcast. Here's my biggest takeaway: emotional patterns are deeply ingrained from childhood and shape our adult relationships. That's why it's so important to clean up our past so we don't keep bringing it into our present and our future. Remember, healing is possible, and breaking free from past wounds can transform your relationships and your life. Please subscribe, rate, review, and share this episode with someone you know who'd benefit. And of course, thanks for listening. Here's to your breakthrough.